Jinesh, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Pretty good. Thanks, Ashu. Thanks for having me at the program. It's good to see you guys again, Navid.
Jinesh, super excited to have you with us. This is a session I've been looking forward to. Because of all the good work that at Omnivore you've been doing in the agri sector, agri food sector, right? This is something which has been a very very critical sector for a variety of reasons, not so sexy, right? But a very very critical, right? Like I said, especially for a country which is as large as India is, and the kind of problems that we continue to see, I think evolution becomes very important, and funding that. Those researches, those developments, that changes and shift become very very important, right? And my sense is, as we come out of COVID, where we become a connected economy, I think, and as we enter a product economy phase, I think food is something which is going to be just so much more critical and talked about, right? And we become information first, like in many ways, right? So the consumer today is very, very aware, right? And that landscape shift is very visible, right? So I think this becomes a very interesting conversation in that context. But before I do that, Jinesh, I'd love you to give us a quick round of introduction, and we move into our conversation from there on.
Sure. Thanks, Ashu. Look, in terms of introduction, started my career with companies like HCL and Patni doing IPOs and mergers after my CA and MBA.
Right.
Spent some 7 years working with the corporate finance department of the IT industry in a couple of IT companies. And then in 2007, joined Nexus as a CFO. Nexus is one of the larger Indian VC fund doing
Sure.
cross-border transactions and tech and consumer-based VC fund. While at Nexus, I was trying to understand the agri and the rural sector just because of my own understanding, and I happened to meet Mark at that point. Conversations nearly took us 2 years for us to say that let's start something together. And then we launched Omnivore in 2010. It took nearly some 2.5 years for us to raise capital,
Right.
first fund, but then it's just has been growing good, right? We've been able to create a reasonable. We raised two funds, and now we're in the process of raising a third fund. So the last 10 years have been in the agri industry, 10, 12 years. Learning agriculture at the same time making investments and hopefully creating some value for the Indian farmers and the Indian ag ecosystem. So that's briefly about me.
Super. Dinesh, now when we heard of Omnivore, right, and this is like a couple of years back, right, especially 16, 17, the understanding was that Omnivore was largely an impact fund, right, or impact continued to be a very critical part of the thesis, right? Over a period it's evolved into, a very deep focus that you had, right? Is that a correct understanding, or was Omnivore always very, very deeply agri-focused and food-focused, fund?
So the historical Omnivore never started as an impact fund. We always started as an agri-focused fund, saying that let's do something for the agri-tech sector.
Sure.
We started doing deals, and while we were doing deals, we realized that we are an impact fund as well, because everyone in the ecosystem started calling us an impact fund, and while we were not knowing what was impact, right? So we started learning of impact. We started learning of impact when people started calling us impact. And then we realized that we do a reasonably decent job creating right impact, and
Right.
that's how we started talking about creating an impact fund focused on agri sector, right? So that's how the narrative changed. It was not from impact to agriculture; it was from agri to impact agri.
Very interesting. Jinesh, I'm going to just come to the portfolio in just a bit, right? And this very, very interesting line of the travel products, right? And in the portfolio, right? Some companies that are leading that change and the shift that we just kind of spoke about, right? But before that, I want to sort of understand, right? Now, when you talk of Indian agri, right, and a lot of people have chosen not to touch it, right? And a lot of institutional funds, for example, chosen to touch that, right, is largely because of the complexity which is involved, right? And this is complexity which is not just at, say, for example, the reach and then infrastructure and the distribution level, right? This complexity is at an educational level, knowledge level, intelligence level, massive cultural dichotomy that we have in India, right? And most importantly, excessive intervention of political forces, which makes it, like I said, right, so much more complicated at many levels, right? And so how have you you've been at it, right, for a reasonable time, right? How big is that a challenge, right? And how is that, for example, changed today? How are you seeing that change? How's this opportunity emerged in the front?
So on the political piece, I think both the parties, whether it's UP or NDA, they're all pro farmers, right?
Sure.
farmers remain electoral,
Just
to get votes from that, right? So they definitely don't want to antagonize that ecosystem for sure, right? So they don't come and disturb anyone, right? At the same time, we are trying to improve the income levels of farmers.
yeah,
We're not trying to squeeze farmers by any means, because that's how the foundation of Omnivore is about, right? Let's
sure.
talk to improvement of farmers, and that helps us to avoid any complexities, right? Besides, if there are any gray areas or the rules which doesn't allow us, we don't touch those sectors. So we've been able to avoid those sectors, and that's the reason the last 10, 12 years, we've been having a lot of debates with government, but it's
Right.
always a healthy debate. Whether it was the UPA government or the NDA government, things have remained reasonably stable. So we don't see any complexities. You want to do something where government is having some problems and want to fight, then there could be issue. We don't want to do that.
Right.
So that doesn't create any problem. Same time, I think, look, people don't understand agriculture, right? 5 years ago, every urban Indian had the thesis that India's agriculture problem will be solved if we increase the size of India's average land holding, right?
Right.
That's a thesis which every urban
Right.
Indian has it, right? But if I take a look, right, our neighbor on the west, Pakistan, has average land holdings which is at
Sure.
least 20, 30 times, 40 times higher than India's average land holding, right? And the yield is maybe 40, 50% lower than India's average yield, right? And our neighbor on the north, China, their average land holding is half of India's, but the yield is probably 50, 60% higher than India's.
Right.
So the land holding average doesn't make sense. And so
Sure.
that's the urban understanding, right? People don't want to move to villages and try to say this is agriculture. It didn't work.
Sure. Right.
At the same time, it's a non-glamorous sector, right?
Right.
Everyone would love to create tech company. Everyone would like to create a branded company, want to create a consumer play. Agriculture is all about dealing with farmers, using soil, water, and chemicals to grow crops and feeding people.
Right.
That's not a glamorous job, right? We are not solving that we're going to sell. Create the next unicorn by creating new next solutions, right?
Right.
Agriculture is all about being patient, doing things, trying to work with lots of stakeholders.
Sure.
And if you get it right, then you have a chance to disrupt and create a significant impact for the large number of stakeholders, right? It's also painfully slow, right?
Sure.
In a tech business, when I used to work with tech VC funds, the transactions are very easy because you can keep innovating. If one experiment fails down, you start next day tomorrow. The second fails down, you start third. In agriculture, you have to wait for the next crop season.
Right.
So it is inherently slow, more patient. So a lot of people didn't invest. But in the last few years, things seem to be changing, Ashu. Because people realize that agri works against, if there is any market downturn happening or anything which is going against, agri works as a bulwark, right? And they are able to withstand. So while agri might not have great speed about doing things, but agri also never dies down.
Sure.
It will always remain because it's a fundamentally ecosystem for essentials, and
Right.
essentials don't die down.
Sure.
So that's the reason it is now in the last few years we are seeing that quite a few people are looking agri as an asset class, and investors are also believing that agri as an asset class is going to become a reasonable bet for them. So that's
Sure.
how it's actually working out.
Very, very interesting. Jinesh, I'm going to move into the portfolio, right? While we answer and while we cover, some of the great companies that you have in the portfolio, right? I would want to talk about, very critical nuance, right? Now, when you're talking about agri, right, we're largely talking about commodity and very commoditized environments, right? Now, this is not an environment which is very domestic, right? This is an environment which is fairly global, right? Depending on the demand and supply, right? But what we're seeing in wheat right now, and that's largely because of the availability of wheat and the pricing of wheat, right? The way the price is moving, right? That's largely because of the Russia-Ukraine war, is an aberration, right? But usually and more often than not, right? The pricing of a commodity, right, is a massive restriction. So irrespective of whatever you do, right, in terms of funding, certain companies which help them get the yield better, help them, supplies better, components, so a variety of things, right? The problem inherently is that of, the pricing that the farmer gets, right? So irrespective of whatever good you want to do, right, you're still essentially open to that risk. Because this is not food processing, right? And when I talk about agri, I talk about more farm level production, right? That adds that extreme risk of sorts, right? And that risk can actually sort of percolate down the supply chain very, very quickly. One, we can understand that, right? And second, of course, we can, even, some of the portfolio companies that you have who are really disrupting this inherent problem that, for example, agri has.
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure. Look, definitely this is the biggest challenge, right? The terms of trade for the farmers have not been good, right? Because everyone connives against him, whether it's right from the at mandi levels, you have few Aratyas doing that, or even the large companies which want to work with the farmers, they don't pay on time. They have a very high credit cycle, and the farmers need to start preparing for the next crop season, right? So it is always a challenge, right? And that is what we want to disrupt, right? Saying, can we improve the terms of trade, right? One way is to use digitization to reduce the number of intermediaries you have it. I'm not by any means saying that intermediaries are bad, but I'm saying that there are ways you can optimize those things, and that is what we want to do it, right? So you work with market linkages, you work farmers to create products or make the produce which is relevant for the export industry or for selling it to some premium buyers, and that is how you keep improving the terms of trade, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's a slow journey, but we are seeing those things happening, right? Companies like companies like Arya, Stanap, they've been able to create those in the grain sector, in the dairy sector, and what we are also seeing that when our consumer demand is changing. If you take a look at your diet and my diet, we have moved from grain-based diet and we are having more of non-grain-based diets, right? So our supply chain is also improving. The farmers are also responding to this, right? So we are seeing farmers are saying, I'm going to produce more fruits and vegetables in horticulture segment. I will do more fisheries, more poultry, and that is how they are seeing around it. I think this is where we are seeing an improvement in the terms of trade. That it's moving towards the demand. At the same time, there is some intermediation which is getting resolved. At the same time, there is the biggest challenge in agri sector is the absence of finance from the organized market, right? It's not that farmers don't get credit; they get credit at 30 to 40% interest kind of cost, right? Now with the startups getting more data from the farmers, getting knowledge about the farmer, the farming sector, they've been able to communicate to the normal banking sector, and we are seeing early days of banking credit getting to the farming ecosystem, and that reduces the cost of credit for the farmers. I have seen in companies like Dehat, Arya, seeing in companies like Resha Mandi, which have been able to disrupt that. And once that happens, the cost of financing goes down, the farming will become more profitable, and they will, and with better market linkages, the terms of trade will improve. So that's what I would say, that's a big challenge, but it's going to be a marathon race. It's not going to happen overnight. Next 5-10 years, we'll hopefully solve the problem.
Interesting. I have many more questions on that one, right? But I think in essence of time, right? I'm gonna move the portfolio, right? Some great companies there. We have Animal, right? Big fan of AgNext. Why don't you tell us a little more about the portfolio?
Look, we got great companies. It's not because we are great. We got good entrepreneurs.
Right. And you're possibly leading it, right? And you've been leading it.
Yeah. Look, companies like AgNext, Taranjit Bhamra, he's focusing on quality metrics, and he's been saying for many years that if we are able to produce the right quality for the buyers, and farmers can adapt to that, and we can objectify the quality rather than having subjectivity, then the terms of trade will become better, right? Because if the buyer knows what quality is getting, the supplier knows what quality is selling, then you can do discovery of price itself, right? That's something which is working, and I think we are now seeing that he's been able to do export trades, he's been able to do domestic markets, working with large players, and is able to create a quality-based metric solutions for various agri commodities. Companies like, we have DGV, which is one of a rural neobank. What we have it's early days for the company, but what it solves is a very unique problem for the Indian dairy farmers. Indian dairy farmers get paid every 10th day from their cooperatives, right? Whether it's Amul or Mother Dairy. But the problem is that these guys are in villages and there's no Google Pay or Yahoo Pay available to those guys, right? The nearest bank is 8 to 9 kilometers away from which they have to go and collect cash and for spending out. When you look at that, it looks a very trivial problem. But if you are to spend half of your productive day, you lose half of day of your income, you stand in the queue in a rural regional bank, and what you do is just collect cash. So you lose 300 to 400 rupees of your income or expenses, and that you just do it for bringing cash which you can spend throughout it, right? Throughout for your monthly expenses. So what DGB has been able to do is work with various commercial banks and saying that instead of farmers going, can I bring the cash to the village itself? So the farmers don't have to spend time. And they've been able to do a great job. I mean, the company started less than 12 months. I mean, it's now doing monthly 20 crores of transaction values. And we think this is kind of disruptive solutions, what they're doing around it. And once you're doing that, I mean, Ashu, you realize that these farmers are now coming in the banking channel itself. So they can get a cattle loan of 11%, 10% rather than 40% interest rates, right? They can get feed credit at 10, 11% rather than 40% interest rate. So you are increasing the income levels, you are helping them to get the paid, and this is creating a huge value for the company, for the dairy ecosystem, and for the farmers involved. So I mean, that's what is very interesting. I mean, we have got quite a few companies. I just took 2 names. I mean, I can keep going forever, right? I mean,
no, I think the list is absolutely fantastic. We've had the opportunity of hosting some of the founders with us, and I think we look forward to hosting many more. Right? I think that's how we possibly cover it better. Now, Jinesh, a couple of other challenges that I want to talk to you about. Right? So, very important point that you highlighted, right? How in terms of these companies kind of making the shift, right? But the fact of the matter is that 70% of India is still in the rural areas, right? And somebody very classically said, right, a large part of this 70% of India being in rural areas is that lack of intent, right? Inherent intent of people wanting to change and switch out, right? That resistance becomes a huge problem, right? While there are startups who are trying to sort of make these changes, while there are policies which are trying to sort of impact, right? People have become inherent comfortable in rural areas, right? The ones that we're talking about who are motivated, who want to sort of, cross over to a better life, to a better environment, right, is a much smaller percentage of people, right? What's your sense of it, right? How difficult do you think is this challenge? Because, to me, that's the most difficult challenge, right? When you do not have this intent to cross over, right, to improve. How big is that a problem? And I would love to understand your thesis around investing, right? And this as a play. And I'd love to understand one more small addition to this, right? Is that, for example, when we continue to look at the consumer landscape, right? Fintech happened, and we had some references in the Chinese market, right? And as fintech took shape, right, and that's largely because of the traceability, which is not necessarily there in the ag ecosystem. Our consumption just blew through the roof, right? We've seen the kind of numbers that we have, right? And that shift has become so much more pertinent, and it's here to stay. What's your sense, in the agri sector? Would love to hear on the thesis from you on that one.
Sure. I mean, let's go back to the question of saying that people are inherently not willing to move out of the comfort zone. I think that's natural for everyone, right? I mean, I'm not debating that should not happen. That's right or wrong. But what we are seeing is that now there is a government focus of saying I want to do a lot of manufacturing in India, right? The Atmanirbhar program. And what we are seeing together today is that there is a lot of agri production happening around it. And we are believing and we are seeing those early days where a lot of agri produce is getting processed. And that processing is happening at the farm gate rather than at the city centers. So we see quite a few youths who were just in the farming saying, can I go to factories in my village or my nearby town rather than going to a large city like Bombay, Delhi or Bangalore? And that is what we will see, right? The more you can bring a convergence of manufacturing and agri-produce together and do the processing at the source level. Because in agriculture business, if you transmit your produce from the village, from the farms, and you just do a long distance, you basically are increasing the cost of your logistics, because agriculture is all about transmitting water in some or the other format, right?
Right.
If you're able to do the processing at the village, and we are seeing those days, we have companies like AgriZ, we have companies like Suit 42, they are doing this. And so we'll see a lot of youth getting into those kind of ecosystem. They might still not want to get into coming to large metros, but they would be happy to do something which is like 50 kilometers from the village. Right. So they would be, and that is what we think is really going to happen around it. India also will have to stop their fetish with centralized processing and everything, right? We cannot replicate the US model. It really works in US because that's the inherent advantage for the US, right? But for a country like India, where production and consumption happens throughout the country, we need to start talking of decentralized processing and decentralized consumption. And that is what is happening around it. So we are looking at few startups. And I think that is where we will see a lot of employment getting into those, and their life will get better because of that. I don't see the entire village coming to Bombay and say let's all settle in Bombay. It's not going to really work around.
Right.
So that's what it is, right? You asked the thesis about what we are thinking. We believe that everything in India should be, because our farmers are small farmers, we cannot think of creating large units. We have to create a smaller unit, because no one's going to leave agriculture completely in next 1 or 2 years, right? It's going to take a transition before population goes down in that sector. So we see companies like EcoZen making micro cold storages with the help of solar power, right?
Interesting.
You make a 5 or 10 or 20 tons kind of a storage capacity at the farm gate. You are seeing companies like Suit 40 doing decentralized processing. We are seeing companies like Animal working in the villages for doing cattle trading, right? No one's saying, everyone used to go to a cattle mela or an animal pashu mela for doing the transactions. Animal is trying to bring those to the farmers digitally and doing those things. So the more we believe that the more we do decentralized way of doing things, I think the more the chances of the ecosystem getting better and better by the day, right? That's what our thesis is.
Super. Jinesh, I think that just sums it all, right? And from an opportunity standpoint, no, I completely agree with you. I think processing is something which is really going to change the rules of the game, right? And I think for farmers, and I think even other players, right? The ability to charge, higher, I think it's going to be a function of how and how beautifully do they come up with new products, right? New variety of products. I think a lot more shift that essentially has to sort of happen there, and I think that cumulatively can impact farmers' life more than anything, right? And I think your intent and direction towards that, right? I think it's going to be just so much more critical because all of this the very large portfolio that you have, right? I call them arms supplier, right? And not in a wrong way, because they make the life of farmers just so much more efficient, improved, right? And they give them the ammo to fight it out, right? These times. I think that is going to have a very, very significant impact, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Completely concur with what you're saying, right? That this is not something which is going to change in the next 2.5 years. This is something which is going to take a decade. We are very large, right? I think that's a massive challenge that we have to deal with. Jinesh, towards the end of the conversation, right? What are the next 2.5 years? Like, what are the targets, if I can call them that you've set for yourself? What's cooking? What's the intent in the next 2.5 years?
Look, I mean, simple short-term agenda is that we're going to have a fund close done. I mean, raising our next fund, so that's a short-term agenda on the fund side. On a midterm agenda, I think we hope to have 4 or 5 unicorns coming from our platform in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, we really hope to see those things happening in 2023. I mean, at least a couple of them have this fair shot of achieving that, and I really hope that happens, right? So that's a short-term agenda. I mean,
interesting. So, short and crisp, right? No, I think Jinesh, for agri, having these unicorns is so much more critical. We haven't seen this, and this is a sector which contributes to one of the largest and the most significant parts of the GDP, right? The overall part in the country. I think it'll definitely be very, very important. And like I said earlier, I think how you pointed out, right? I think this decentralized processing, I think, is going to really disrupt this entire game, right? And that the good part is that the consumer is today aware, right? And I think if you can just connect these two, sets, right, of an urban consumer, which is there's no inhibition, right? As information first can actually go out, consume and spend, and has more disposable capital, right? To these processing possibilities, right? New products coming in. I think that's going to create a very different kind of a wave of consumption, right? And I think that's possibly what agri requires at that point in time. I think you've already identified it, and we'd wait through here on the next announcements that you make, right? Like some of the amazing companies like you've done in the past. It'll be spectacular to keep track of some of that. Jinesh, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, there are a bunch of other questions that I would love to talk to you about, but I'm going to save some of that for the next conversation, which we'll look to hopefully soon.
Thanks, Ashu. Thanks for having me, and thank you, listeners, for listening to us. Thank you very much.
Jinesh, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.
Bye.